and welcome to a special edition of Life on Board Amy Joe. I'm on my own for this one because I'm going to indulge myself on this. As you all know, I've recently recovered from COVID, which I had quite severely, and I really need to tell the story of my experience going through the COVID illness from start to finish. The reason I need to do this is because I need closure. I need to move on from this illness now. I'm virtually over it now. I'm still a little bit on the weak side, but it's been 2 months of a struggle, to be honest. You can hear me pausing even now. I'm off the oxygen, but I still have to keep breathing. So please indulge me on this one. It's going to be very emotional. It's going to be filmed by me over several days because I don't think I'm going to be able to do this in one video. You will find it emotional. You may find it upsetting. So if you do, please turn off. I'll be quite understandable if you don't want to watch the video at all and the viewing figures are down. I perfectly understand that, but I need to do this for closure. So please bear with me on this video. You're more than welcome to watch, but like I say, it's going to be emotional, it's going to be upsetting. Some of the images that I'll be showing were me in hospital, can be a little upsetting. Some of them I've already shown on Facebook, but I need to do this for closure. So if you want to stay with me, have a drink ready and we'll get this underway. So where do we begin then? Well, the whole thing started way back in the 10th of February 2021. For a few evenings I'd started having palpitations or rapid heartbeats. Now I've suffered this since 2003 on and off, and I have techniques which enable me to, if you like, reset the heartbeat back to normal. But on this particular occasion, the exercises I didn't work. The rapid heartbeat continued, and it was always around about 6 o'clock in the evening and went on for about hour and a half on and off. So after about 3 days of this, Chris decided she was going to call 111, which in the UK is a non-emergency medical line. And they advised that I go to A&E at the local hospital. So we duly went to A&E as instructed, and I spent 3 hours sitting in A&E reception. I was called in for an ECG, sent back out again. An hour later I was called back in again, another ECG, outside again. But of course by this time the palpitations had stopped. So eventually it was decided they would keep me in overnight and put me on a heart monitor and see what happens. Well, sod's law, not a single palpitation had occurred overnight, and next morning I was duly discharged with an appointment with the cardio department to have a monitor fitted that would monitor me for a week to see how I get on. We thought that would be the end of it, but over the coming days I started to develop the cough, and the cough got worse, and coupled with that I started to feel very tired. In fact, as the days went on, I didn't realise, but my strength was being sapped away to a point where I could barely walk down the length of the boat to go to bed. Then my sense of taste changed, and I noticed it when I had a drink of water. The water tasted like lead, and at first I thought perhaps there was a problem with the water tank on Amy Joe. But then when I had a cup of tea later and it tasted the same, I realised something wasn't right. And when it came to meal times, my appetite just disappeared. Using the track and trace app, I put in the symptoms and was advised to have a COVID test, which we duly did, and it came out positive. So we set ourselves aside to self-isolate, Chris included, because obviously she'd been in contact with me. But the next morning when I got up, I woke up in the morning, took my CPAP mask off, and I couldn't breathe. I was really struggling to breathe, couldn't catch my breath, and I couldn't get out of bed. I literally didn't have any strength left in me to get out of bed. So once again, Chris called 111, and this time they sent a paramedic out to see me. We'd explained the symptoms, and sure enough, the medic turned up. Lovely lady, took one look at me and said, "I'm calling an ambulance. If you're COVID positive, clearly you are going into severe symptoms and you need to get to hospital now." From that point on, everything was a bit of a blur. I remember Chris helping me to get dressed, helping me to get down the boat so I could get out, the ambulance waiting at the end of the jetty, and two paramedics and a pushchair. Pushchair, a wheelchair. I was made to sit in the wheelchair, I was put on an oxygen mask, and I was wheeled into the back of the ambulance, just in time to see Gary from Chuggabug going past with the boys, Chip and Dale, who we briefly had an exchange, and the next thing I was whisked off to hospital. I was rushed into A&E. I was examined by a doctor within minutes, and then from there straight up into ICU, which is the intensive care unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital, which is just down the road from where I am now. The next few days are literally a blur. I can remember being in a room roughly about 10 feet by 10 feet with glass windows on the front and sliding doors. I can remember laying on a bed with instruments all around me beeping and blipping, IV bags hanging off of hooks, wires connected to me all over. I had 3 cannulas put into my arm so that the IV fluids could be pumped into me, because apparently, unbeknown to me, I was extremely dehydrated, and because I hadn't eaten, I needed to get some fluids into me. So I had literally a cannula here with 3 ports on it, each with a bag connected, so that they could monitor my blood pressure and pulse rate. I had a second one here, back here, with a line that went up to an instrument that was monitoring my pulse and blood rate. And then I had a third one in the crook of the arm here, so that they could take blood samples whenever they wanted without actually using a needle all the time. On top of that, I had to have this mask, which was they call it a CPAP mask. Now, for those of you that don't know, CPAP stands for constant pressure air pump. So basically what they were doing, they were pumping 10 litres a minute of oxygen into my lungs, because I couldn't breathe on my own. So it was almost to a point where they were going to put me on a ventilator. And all this time I was attended by 2 nurses in full PPE, coveralls, face masks, and bless them, they had to wear 2 pairs of latex gloves, which they then had to seal with tape to their coveralls. And every time they came into the room, they had to put on a disposable apron and another 3rd pair of disposable gloves, which made it very difficult for them to actually handle things like syringes and needles and blood vials. But as I say, that first 3 days were a blur. I don't remember a thing. I do remember laying on the bed in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling with tears in my eyes. I didn't think I was going to see the morning. Now, I'm not a practicing Christian, but I do believe in the good Lord. And that night, I begged for my life to the Lord, because I wanted to see the morning. And then stupidly, I got angry and I yelled at the good Lord, "I may be 63, but I'm not ready to join you yet. You're going to help me get through this." And to this day, I believed he did. The following week, or the week that ensued, was just the darkest hours of my life ever. I don't think I could put anybody through what I went through there. There I was laying on this hospital bed, pipes and tubes everywhere, almost unable to move because of them, with this dirty grey big uncomfortable mask on my face, which the part that went up to the forehead here was so uncomfortable. Even today now, the bridge of my nose is still sore from the damn thing. They had to strap it on so tight so that there were no air leaks, that for days afterwards I had a line around here that you could see. Every 4 hours, and I mean every 4 hours, the nurses were coming round doing their observations. Obviously they didn't need to do the blood pressure because I was hooked up to the machine for that, but they'd have to take blood samples. I had to have COVID swab tests, MSR, RSMA, I think it's called, tests, which are more swabs. And this went on every day for a week. From 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, and so on. There was no sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was in too much pain. My chest felt like it had got an elephant sitting on it, and I just lay there. And it gave me time to contemplate and to think. But there weren't thoughts of, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to do things differently when I get out of here. They were thoughts of, what would Chris do if I wasn't around? How would she cope with Amy Jo? And my two girls, Amy and Joanne, what would they do if I wasn't around? Hours. These thoughts went through my mind. Hours. On a lighter note, during this first week, while I was laying in the bed, every now and again I would have these young doctors pop in with a form for me to read and sign, asking me to join some university study or other. Now, as you can see, I wear glasses, and I've got this big CPAP mask on my face, and they're saying to me, you need to read this and agree if you would like to carry on with it. Well, of course, I couldn't read it, so I made them sit at the end of the bed and read out their own blurb, which they weren't happy about. But they were for good causes. One of them was for a genome mapping of my blood, which involved the blood sample. The study was actually to look at why COVID affects some people severely, as in my case, and other people like Chris, who I discovered had COVID as a result of me having it, only had mild symptoms. And I'm glad she did, because I don't think I could have coped if she'd have ended up where I was. So I gladly signed up for that one. So at least I know my genomes have been fully mapped for future use. Another study was for 3 new drugs that had been developed and in trials had proven very effective in treating COVID. And now they wanted to do further, wider trials to see how it affected severe patients like myself. So yeah, I signed up for that one, and to this day I'm convinced it was those drugs, or the one that I was given, that was successful in curing me quickly of COVID. Now apparently in the past it would have taken 2, maybe 3 months to get through what I did in a month. The drawback was, of course, they didn't know what side effects, long-term side effects, these drugs would have. So we're still waiting to find out if there are any. One they did alert me to, which might be a possibility, is the fact that I could be susceptible to infections for up to 6 months. Touch wood, there somewhere. We've been okay in the 3 weeks that we've been home, so fingers crossed on that. So after a few days of taking these drugs, plus all the steroids that they were pumping into me and what have you, I woke up one morning and actually started to feel a little bit better. In fact, I was hungry for the first time in 2 weeks, sorry. And they asked me would I like something to eat. So I said, yes please, but only something light, like a salad. So they gave me a ham salad. And boy, the revelation when I took that first mouthful of ham, and I could actually taste ham and not lead. So, buoyed up by this, I actually said to the nurse, is there any chance I could have a hot drink? So she said, yes, what would you like? I said, can I have tea with 2 sugars, please? Imagine my delight when I took that first mouthful of tea and actually tasted tea. I think that was the first time my spirits started to rise and I began to feel good. But the joy was also tinged with sadness that day. While I was having my breakfast, the alarm bells started ringing. Wasn't the fire bell, it was just an emergency button had been pressed. Nurses ran from everywhere. I don't know where they came from, but they just ran down the corridor. And something was obviously going down, no idea what it was. And then about half hour later, the nurses started coming back. And you could see they were clearly upset. In fact, 2 of them actually came back in tears, comforting each other. Later in the afternoon, I actually asked, I said, what went on this morning? Why were the nurses in tears? And they said that a 28-year-old lady who was a friend of one of the nurses hadn't made it. COVID had ended her life, basically, and the nurses were so upset about it, and they were very quiet. Even the ones that came in to see me, who had nothing to do with the patient, you could tell they were deeply hurt. They were quiet, they were subdued, and I could see them outside comforting each other. Now these nurses must have seen this day in, day out, because at one point the hospital had over 300 COVID patients, and so many had not made it. And it made me realise just how lucky I was, because I could feel I was making a recovery. But that was a sobering day, I must say. But enough of that now. I was on the mends, and as each day went past, I started to feel better. They sat me up in the chair, which was one of the most uncomfortable chairs I've ever sat in, and day by day things started to improve. By the end of the second week, things had improved that much that during the day they were taking me off the CPAP, and I was on what they call a nasal high flow mask, like this one. And that was much better because it meant I could talk, I could eat when I wanted to eat, and I was finding my appetite was coming back. And I've got a big appetite normally, and I was getting through the food and drinking a lot, and it actually became a standing joke, actually, because when I needed the loo, I had to use a commode or I had to use a bottle, and because they'd been pumping fluids into me and I had to drink a lot, it was going through me like a dose of souls, and I was going through bottles left, right and centre. And at night when we settled down, the nurses used to say to me, we'll get you a bottle, and they'd come back with an armful of about 7 or 8 of them, plonk them on my table and go, that'll keep you going all night, Steve. And sure enough, I'd get through them. Probably one of the best days in that period for me was the day I decided I'd play a little surprise on Ian, Gary and Alan. This particular day was the live broadcast by Forgo Narrowboating, and it was only going to be the 3 of them, and they were really disappointed that I couldn't join them. But I had the last laugh because I joined them, and I was taken aback by the emotion of the three of them. I think I had them in tears, but it was lovely to be there, however briefly it was. Just take a look at this.
It hasn't really been defined, but perhaps someone like myself, for example, might be able to go out.
Hang on.
Oh, here comes Steve again.
Sorry, Steve, mate.
That's it. That's a bit. Sorry about that. The internet's not very good here, so it's breaking up a little bit. So I'm only going to be on for a little while. But you're not going to keep the old dog away from my forum and have it go narrowboating, mates.
Oh, God bless you.
So I'm fine. Just to let everybody know, I'm absolutely fine. I am having some problem with oxygen levels at the moment, hence this paraphernalia around my nose is to try and keep my oxygen sats up. But other than that, I'm doing fine. I feel great. And I just want to add thank you to everybody for all your well wishes and prayers. It's meant so much. And when I first came in, I've never been so scared in all my life. But to have all those well wishes and prayers made it so much easier. So God bless you all, folks. I really appreciate it.
God bless you too, mate.
See, they were very emotional. But it's all thanks to the nurses, because when I told them about Forgo narrowboating and that we were going to be doing a live feed, bless them, they put every light on in the ward that they could possibly put on. And they sat there and never said a word. And I'm pleased to say, as a result of that, I actually got some subscribers who signed up for the Life on Board narrowboat. Some of the nurses enjoyed it so much that they're now subscribers. So thank you, nurses. By the end of the second week, the nurses deemed me well enough that I could be moved from the mainstream ICU unit to what they called the surge unit. Now the surge unit is still part of ICU, but it just means that it's a lower level of intensive care. And in fact, it was in a different ward. And I later learned from the consultant who I was under, who incidentally came out of retirement because of the pandemic, that the ward I was being taken to was actually the old ICU ward. And it had been the old ICU ward right up until the beginning of the year. And the ICU unit that I was in had actually been purposely made from 3 other wards. That's how bad the pandemic was. Now in this new ward I joined 3 other COVID patients. There was a young Polish lad by the name of Peter who had got milder symptoms, but he was on a CPAP like I was, and he needed to stay in for a few days just to sort him out. And within 3 days of me being in that ward, Peter actually went home. There was an Irishman, also had been in hospital for a month. He went home the same day I went in. And the second chap was a chap called Dave. Now Dave was a great character. We hit it off together and became very good friends in the ward. Dave is actually spent the last 20 years being a DJ. So he was actually brilliant. He got thousands and thousands of songs on his phone that he could get hold of. And one particular afternoon we sat there was 2 lovely nurses on, Lucy I think her name was, and Nikki. It was a nice bright afternoon. We could see the sun coming in through the windows, although we couldn't see out of them because it was just a brick wall opposite. And we got chatting to the nurses, as you do, because things had quietened down a little bit. And Dave decided he was going to play some music. Now Dave was big into the 70s, 80s and 90s music. And of course that was our age group, and the nurses loved the 90s music. So Dave started playing this, and they were all well-known tunes. And believe it or not, by about 5 o'clock, we were all in the ward singing Hi-Ho Silver Lining, nurses and doctors included. And you could see the joy in their eyes, the sparkle had actually come back in their eyes. Before it had just been dull and tired looking. The nurses were singing along. They were dancing as well and thoroughly enjoying it. And by 8 o'clock, when their shift change came over, they'd got a spring back in their step, and they came over to David and gave him a big hug and thanked him for making their day. He cheered them up no end, and it was really good to see. And the other thing I remember is every time a patient made progress, the look of joy in their eyes, I mean, you couldn't see them smiling because clearly they had the face masks on, but the look of joy in their eyes when you did something for the first time. You know, for instance, I had been bedridden for 3 weeks, and the physiotherapist turned up and said, "Come on, Steve, you need to start walking." And I got out of the bed with a Zimmer frame, and I managed to walk the length of the ward and back. And I got an applaud and cheers from the nurses, and you could see the joy in their faces knowing that I was making a recovery. And that was a joy to behold, I tell you. It was lovely to see. After a few days in this ward, my oxygen level, bearing in mind I'd been on oxygen 24/7, was dropped from 10 litres a minute down to 4 litres a minute. They monitored me, and they were still doing blood tests and all the other good stuff, 4 hourly observations, etc. And the consultant came round that day and said, "Look, we think you've made a sufficient recovery now. We're going to put you out in a normal ward and see how you get on from there." And if you could have been in my place, I was in tears. I literally broke down and cried. I knew I was over the worst and I was making a full recovery, and but I was having difficulty breathing, so the consultant recommended I went for a scan to see if there was any underlying issues. Now when I was breathing, my chest felt as though it had got a band around it, because they kept saying to me, "Breathe in and expand your chest to get more air into you," and I just couldn't. I really could not, so they wanted to investigate that. The outset of the scan actually showed that I had some scarring on my lungs caused by COVID, and this was why I was having difficulty breathing. The nurses assured me that in most cases people made a full recovery, but it could take weeks, it could take months. So I took the news, swallowed the information and carried on. I spent a week in the surge ward, so by now I'd been in hospital for 3 weeks, and I had another COVID test and it came back clear. Now you would not believe how happy I was to hear that, to know that I'd actually beaten COVID was so good. And to celebrate that, the nurses or the doctors actually said that they would move me now to a normal recovery ward. So I was wheeled halfway across the hospital to ward 44. And when I came in the ward, there's this 6-berth ward with nobody in it. I was the only patient in the ward. I later found out that was because I was on the CPAP, and the CPAP was known as a known dispersant of breathed air, and they didn't want to chance it with other patients. However, by the end of the day, another patient came in, and then there were 3 the next day. An elderly gentleman came in. Now David, his name was in his 90s, bless him. And he was very vocal, extremely vocal, calling on the nurses 24/7. You know, "Nurse, I need this. Nurse, can you help me with that?" Which you could feel for him. I mean, the guy was obviously suffering. But this went on through the night as well, and the nurses were getting a little bit fed up with it, but they tended to his needs nonetheless. And then the next day, as the day went on, he got quieter and quieter, and they drew the curtains around him, and they changed his bed, they did all sorts for him. One of the nurses stayed in with him, and I heard the matron of the ward say, "Phone the family now." So it was pretty obvious what was going on. Quite upsetting. We spent that night listening to David, breathing heavily and rasping in his breath. And it was quite upsetting for me because I can remember when my mother died, her breathing was exactly the same. So I laid there with tears in my eyes listening to David. And I was awoken, I eventually went to sleep, and I was awoken at 5 o'clock in the morning by a hustle and bustle of activity around David's bed. And this went on for about half an hour. People came and went, and eventually they wheeled David out of the ward. We couldn't see him, there was so many nurses and doctors around him. And a young nurse came up to me and asked me if I wanted a hot drink, as they did. And I said to him, "Is David okay?" And she looked at me and she literally went, I said, "He didn't make it, did he?" She said, "No, he passed away." Now I could tell that she didn't really want to tell me that because she thought I was going to get upset. So that was the second person while I was in hospital I found out had passed away due to COVID. So again, it really did make me feel good. But I was quite down, I must admit. And a nurse came in and said, "Your wife's outside, she's brought you some stuff. Would you like to see her?" Well, of course I wanted to see her, so I said yes. She said, "I'll go and get you a wheelchair. I won't be a minute." And she came back, she said, "I'm terribly sorry, Steve." She said, "There aren't any spare wheelchairs, but we've got the commode, if you don't mind sitting on that." She said, "I'll take you out on the commode." And that's what we did. Oxygen bottle in hand. She wheeled me out to the reception area, and sure enough, there was Chris in the doorway. Well, to see Chris in the flesh for the first time, it really did pick my spirits up. And I'm convinced to this day that was the turnaround point where I actually started to improve quickly. That day they dropped my oxygen level to 4 litres a minute, and that's where I stayed. And within 2 days they announced that I could go home. Man, was that good news. So the day came and I was trundled in the back of an ambulance and sent home. But I had to wait until they'd installed some oxygen supply for me. When I got home I expected bottles of oxygen, but no. In fact, there was 2 compressors like this one. Yeah, and I had one in the front of the house and one in the back. And what they did, they supplied enough oxygen hose for me to walk from one end of the house to the bedroom at the back of the house. I could then switch over to the other compressor, and I could connect that to my CPAP pump, and I could go to bed with the CPAP pump on. And of course in the morning it was the reverse. Chris could get the hose from the one in the front of the house. We could turn the one off that I'd used overnight, and I could wear the oxygen hose from the one in the front of the house, and I could wander backwards and forwards. And that was that. Now, it was all I could do was to walk from one end of the house to the other, and I had to sit down. I just didn't have the energy, and I found myself struggling to breathe. And we had this little SATS oxygen meter that I had to put on my fingers. Now, normal person SATs are around about 96, 97. Mine were 91. They were that low. And gradually over a period of days that improved. And then from then on life was normal. I actually managed to get out in the garden. It was a sunny day, and my first time outside since I'd come out of hospital, I sat at the bottom of the garden and I had lunch with Amy, with Joanne and Chris, and it was lovely, absolutely gorgeous. And then on the Monday, Bank Holiday Monday, it was Easter Bank Holiday, we actually came back to Amy Jo, and as you can see, the recording changed halfway through this vlog because I'm now back on board Amy Jo, and I am so pleased to be home. It's been a real pleasure. He is still with me. Yeah, like I said, that was a journey that I never want to take again. Anyway, enough rattling on from me. I do hope that gave you a good insight into what it's like to have severe COVID. As you can see, it's not very nice. It's extremely emotional, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. However, I am grateful that you have stuck with me. Thank you for watching, and I'd like to end this vlog with some pictures of the nurses, because I think they deserve a huge thank you from the nation, and I'm appalled with the government, to be fair, for their pay rise. They deserve better than that. But yep, there's some pictures of the nurses, and there's a video of me actually coming home, which I hope you'll enjoy. It's accompanied by some music. The title and the composer, etc., are in the credits at the end of the video. So thank you for staying with me. It's been really hard to make this video. It's been done over 4 days. There's still more I could say. It's just, it would be too long, and it would bore you to death. But I hope that you'll see COVID is real and it's nasty, and the day we get on top of this horrible virus, we should celebrate. So thank you again for watching. Bye for now.
I'm a true believer, blissfully naive. I've got a bucket full of false hope up my sleeve. Put it down to judgment, I'm learning every day. Every good thing, every bad thing won't go to waste. No way. Well, I believe that life goes on. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. Somewhere down the line you're gonna find peace of mind and blue skies. I'm a true believer. You're out of inspiration, simply getting by, low on motivation, running dry. Take a sip of it don't matter, and a taste of never mind. Just a pinch of it could happen, and it just might, it just might. Oh, I believe that life goes on. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. Somewhere down the line you're gonna find peace of mind and blue skies. I'm a true believer. On my shoulder, but there were devils in my past. Still, as I get older, all things must pass. All things must pass. Well, I believe that life goes on. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. Somewhere down the line you're gonna find peace of mind and blue skies. I believe that life goes on. Those thunder clouds will soon be gone. I know there'll come a time you're gonna find peace of mind and blue skies. I'm a true believer.